Hi guys, this video kind of changed while I was making it, so I'm just jumping on really quickly here to just show you something here. So we're going to get to in this video the hypocrisy of Camilla Tominey and the Telegraph, which is fascinating and intriguing and hilarious in some ways. Like, seeing that all kind of implode and them trying to deal with that is really interesting and in some ways quite satisfying. I also talk in this video quite a lot about, you know, the BBC bias and the contract between the royals and the BBC, the myth of BBC impartiality, which is not true, and the invisible contract that Harry was telling us about some years ago, which people are acting like they've only just discovered was a thing. But what I wanted to show you here is I try and keep up with how Meghan's name is being used in the media, and to this day, like, they will still post awful things about her, even though she's not a working royal, you know, she's not paid for by taxpayers, she's doing her own stuff. But over the past few days, there's been this massive influx of anti-Meghan stuff. So I'm going to try and get it on the screen and show you quickly before we get into this so you know what I mean. So you'll probably know by now that Andrew's been arrested, okay? Obviously things have been looking bad for the firm in general. It came out recently from the BBC. We knew this anyway, but the BBC themselves and other outlets were reporting on the fact that Charles and the Queen, the late Queen, had both chipped in to pay off Virginia Giuffre, a victim of trafficking. So of course, one of the only things the firm knows how to do in these situations is to go, look over there, look at the villains we've created. And my goodness, they've created a villain in Meghan Markle. Let me just show you some of this. Buckingham Palace wanted to make Prince Harry the Governor General of Canada to placate Meghan, but plan didn't work because he isn't Canadian. Prince Harry, Meghan Markle shut the door on Princess Eugenie. Why Meghan Markle and Prince Harry decided to share a photo of Princess Elizabeth's face. The mystery of Meghan Markle's diamond ring. Could the Duchess of Sussex's jewel symbolise a new era of self-love and personal power? Meghan and Harry's strained marriage torn apart by humiliating two-word verdict. Prince Harry and Meghan's declaration of war that sparked chaos for royals. Meghan Markle interrupts Andrew arrest drama to share her message. Meghan Markle shocked. Duchess sports a 190k diamond amid claims she hates Prince Harry's ring. Meghan Markle mocked over cringe Prince Harry video. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's secret sign of frustration that the cameras didn't linger on. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's first sign of crisis in royal family exposed. Prince Harry's despair over Meghan Markle's lavish demands for UK trip. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's Netflix declaration of war on royals. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry pack on the PDA at a surprise NBA All-Star game appearance. A charity supported by Meghan Markle after Grenfell Tower disaster shuts down. And Harry's incredulous Meghan Markle demand put Kate Middleton in an impossible situation. So I feel like I couldn't go forward in the video without mentioning the obvious manoeuvres that are being made here to distract, and they're using Meghan even now to try and protect themselves from accountability, to try and protect the very system that caused her so much pain. It's so sick, but I thought I can't really go into the video without showing you this, and you kind of wouldn't believe it. Like, it's really bizarre. It's bizarre and it's quite evil. Okay, I'll leave you to your video now, and I hope you enjoy. Hi guys, Claudia Boleyn here. So I was actually going to make an ASMR video this evening, which is why it's kind of like the lighting's a bit different and it's quite quiet, because I've got a free house. And I wasn't expecting to make a political / anti-monarchy video tonight. But I woke up this morning and I saw that Andrew had been arrested. So I saw this on the BBC News. My interest in this is how the BBC is obviously a pro-monarchy channel. There's an unofficial contract. So I wanted to quote Harry here. I've got notes here, by the way, if I'm looking over here. So Harry calls it an invisible contract. He was ruthlessly attacked for telling us this. And now it seems to be that different publications are saying the same thing now, like it's new, when he was saying that quite a few years ago. And he was mocked, he was ridiculed. They called him unpatriotic, they called him this, like, rebel, and as we'll get into in this video, the most ridiculous thing about that is that Harry was and is, I mean, I don't know his position now, but at that time, he was still a monarchist. So his perspective, I mean, I feel like people read Spare and was so... They already had their ideas in place. And we are, in Britain, one of these places that I know that we pretend that we're great on mental health stuff and time to talk and let's talk about mental health. But when people actually want to talk about mental health and how that interacts with systems and actually being more accessible and actually listening to people, we tend to think of that as whining. Like, we will rip into people who go to therapy, for example, and we'll see it as like almost narcissistic, when to me it's like the opposite. It's surely our duty that it's not our fault if we come from a bad situation or we suffer from mental health issues, but we are adults in the world. We need to learn how to deal with that for ourselves so we can be more productive, and I don't just mean in a capitalistic sense more productive, I mean that we can make the best of our situation, also so that we can help other people. I'm someone who's been through the mental health system since the age of about, I think, the age of 14, and I've been diagnosed with autism now, which I think is a cause of a great deal of my issues, but there's also some complex trauma stuff. But I've always thought that, you know, you can't really contextualize something or learn from it if you're not willing to look at how we got there. So I've been someone who's really battled for you know, therapy being a good thing, because, you know, when I was growing up, it was something that you really had to fight for. People thought it was over dramatic, and why don't you just get on with it? Why are you whining? That kind of thing. We've come further there, but it was really interesting and sad to see that when Harry wrote his book, people weren't responding to it and analysing it, I don't think, from a fair standpoint. I think it's fine to disagree with anything he says in the book. You know, I think you can criticise anything. I think it's an interesting read no matter where you stand on the situation, but people were actually misrepresenting it. They were misrepresenting his own argument, and they were portraying him as an angry, aggressive, tantruming boy who whined too much. The very media that had caused him such extreme trauma, and a therapist in the book suggests he has post-traumatic stress disorder. I would suggest complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I also feel like there's neurodivergence in the family as well. I'm saying that as someone who is neurodivergent, and I don't say it as a bad thing. Sometimes when you say, oh, maybe this person's neurodivergent, sometimes people get annoyed about that. And that's actually quite offensive because, you know, there's nothing wrong with being neurodivergent at all. It's just that sometimes you spot qualities in people and you think, oh, maybe, you know, it's not an accusation. It's not like a bad thing. I hate when people think that it's a bad thing. But they really took a boy that we all watched his trauma. I wasn't even born, but I've seen the footage. You know, I was aware that this was a boy who was traumatized. So even the best possible reading of people, you know, thinking, oh, maybe he's really misguided, you would still have to accept that even if you think that, it's come from very extreme and understandable trauma. And how did they respond to it? They didn't reasonably address the situation. They mocked him. They further mocked him and lied about what he was. They lied about his position in the book. They made him out to be this vengeful, evil person trying to take down the monarchy, which was interesting for someone like me who's so anti-monarchy reading it. He's a monarchist. At that point in his life, he was a monarchist. So Harry was somebody who was pushing for, a while ago, the modernisation of the monarchy. As somebody who is an anti-royalist and thinks it's an undemocratic, I say this all the time, it's an imperialist, colonialist, a patriarchal system. It is inherently unfair. It's not democratic. Even the fact that it runs on like a bloodline, and I won't get into that, I talk about that all the time. But the thing that's so crazy making here is that what Harry was pushing for, and what he believed at that time, again, I don't know what he believes now, was the very thing that these commentators are now waking up to and saying, oh, why didn't the royals do this? Why didn't the royals modernise? Why didn't they make these changes? And then the one member of the family who was actually saying those things, and again, I'm glad they didn't do it. I'm glad they didn't modernise, because I would prefer the monarchy gone. I don't want there to be a monarchy, I can't stand it. But it is crazy making to see these commentators suddenly acting like that was a rational and reasonable thing to do, and why didn't anyone say it? And in fact, they're trying to act like, oh, maybe William will do it, that'll be good, and maybe William's been secretly doing it behind the scenes. Whereas only a few years ago, Harry was saying those things and being smeared as unpatriotic. He acted like he was whining and unpatriotic and trying to destroy the monarchy, and disrespecting his grandmother and disrespecting his father in the institution. And I do find that it's like with politics, it's like with Jeremy Corbyn. And, you know, Jeremy Corbyn, is not that he's faultless. I don't like a lot of, especially recently, the way he's handled things, especially with like your party, and I won't get into that here. But the things that he was saying, which were, you know, they weren't like radical left-wing. They were just very basic democratic socialist ideas. He was smeared as being this, you know, this crank, this unpatriotic, evil, dangerous crank. And they always do this, okay? So the people saying these things get smeared at the time, and then the world moves forward and everyone pretends that they always knew that was the right thing, and, oh, we all moved along as a society. And it's very difficult and unfair for those people that were the first ones saying it, which is often the left in a political situation. But essentially in the royal system, that is what has happened to Harry, because what he was pushing for was a modernised version of the monarchy. I'm now seeing people, channels that were biased against him, you know, these journalists, these royal reporters, distancing themselves, acting like, oh, we've just woken up. And of course it's common sense, the things that Harry was saying. But when he was saying them, Harry was being smeared, right? His wife was being racially abused. That man was harassed by the media and by the firm, if we believe that they were planting stories, for things that A, would have saved them now or would help them now, and B, everyone's acting like, why didn't the monarchy do it? Why was no one saying that? You know, why didn't we all know that was the right thing to do? Like, it's crazy making. So anyway, that was a great big tangent. This was supposed to be scripted, but it's not scripted now. But obviously, you know, Harry was talking about the contract between the media and the royal family, and especially with the BBC. It's essentially an exchange. The BBC is granted favourable coverage to the royals, so they get all the rights to the big events and they get all the best footage and photographs and the exclusives, and in return the BBC grants them favourable coverage. So the BBC the BBC presents itself as this like unbiased, that's propaganda as well, this unbiased institution, which is hilarious because it's literally it runs on a royal charter. The royal charter, okay? Like the two institutions, royalty and the BBC, are deeply embedded. So much like the monarchy, the lie is that you can trust us, you know, we have this access, we are impartial, you can trust the BBC to be totally unbiased. Meanwhile, they're in a contract with the royals, presenting monarchy as this neutral thing rather than a right-wing conservative institution. So people are just lapping that up, especially, I think, older generations more. I think older generations, I don't say this like to get at them, I just mean that they might not be so used to social media, technology, and they've grown up believing that they can trust the BBC. So often, like, I will talk to like an older relative, like good people, and they will believe everything the BBC tells them. If there's any other sort of source available, they will view that with great suspicion. And in some cases, that's very wise, because obviously not all sources are to be believed. But there's this belief that the BBC wouldn't lie, the BBC wouldn't have bias, the BBC wouldn't try and sway something, you know. Everything they say is gospel. And then you have a situation like Gaza and the genocide that's being, and the genocide of Palestinians. And that's where I think a lot of younger people have finally hit breaking point, because they're seeing the direct information and sources coming out of Palestine and out of Gaza. What they managed to get out anyway, obviously, Israel has been killing journalists. It's turned off the internet a lot of times. It wouldn't allow international journalists into Gaza. So then if Palestinians themselves are saying these are the atrocities that have happened to us, like we literally have footage, you know, we're all saying it, please listen to us, the BBC then say, oh, but we can't verify that information, unfortunately. Or that, you know, the number of dead, and they'll say, oh, but that's the Hamas-run health ministry. And then they don't mention the fact, you know, when they're saying that, however, the reason we're not able to verify that is because Israel won't allow our journalists in, right? So they don't tell you that. And again, I've spoken about this in other videos, but the way that there's a very pro-Israel stance on the BBC. You know, whenever Palestinians are killed, it's unconfirmed, right? We can't confirm these reports. This is what they're saying. It's to create these ideas that, oh, might not be true. We're not really sure. We should probably, you know, ignore that. And I do believe the BBC could choose to verify information if they wanted to, and I don't think they have wanted to. You know, they didn't kick up a huge stink when Israel wouldn't let their journalists in. I mean, I feel like that's the point when, well before that, honestly, but you know, at that point, I feel like as an organisation, you have a responsibility to say, these people are not letting journalists in. We therefore don't trust them. They would speak about statements made by Benjamin Netanyahu, who was the architect of genocide and a war criminal and wanted for war crimes, right, by the International Criminal Court, versus the doubt they put in the sort of, you know, the Hamas-run health ministry. They describe the deaths of Palestinians as, you know, I'm not saying that they celebrate it, but they present it as a sad natural disaster, you know, a sad consequence of war. And then when it's the suffering of Israelis, it's much more humanising. So they're not just numbers, you know, you've got the families of the hostages. And if you just look at, you know, the amount of humanising, as there should be, of the families of hostages, right, who had loved ones that were taken hostage, and you know, the way we spoke to their families. The BBC really wanted us to, you know, feel that pain on a human level, which is vital for news stories. Of course you have to, you know, there were names, there were faces, whereas the Palestinians were kind of presented as this kind of, this mass, you know, like, oh, there's numbers, but you're not getting that direct humanising, you know, words of them from the ground. The BBC also seems to act as if the conflict, as they call it, began on October the 7th. So from the very beginning, we're starting from a premise which is heavily biased towards the Israeli narrative. You know, it's accepting that it began on October the 7th, which it didn't. Like, just in a matter of reality, it did not. You know, if you're going to cover it and you're going to call it, you know, tensions in the region and tensions if you don't want to call it genocide, why are you starting on October the 7th then? Why? I remember when the hospital was bombed, and I was talking about this on X recently. The first big, you know, at the very beginning, when Israel bombed a hospital, and I remember being, I was sure, I was like, well, obviously Israel has bombed that hospital. And at the time, we were called anti-Semitic, and people were saying, we can't say that, Israel would never do that. And, you know, it was probably a Hamas rocket, you know, they probably did it. We mustn't jump to conclusions. And that was crazy making, because I thought, well, I've been watching Israel, you know, level civilian buildings. I think it was in 2021 I saw it happening. So I thought, okay, well, maybe they just want to be sure, and okay. Israel has now turned Gaza into rubble, like the whole thing. And still the BBC is behaving as if we can't really say what's right and what's wrong. And I still remember the very, very first hospital that was bombed, and the way people were treated for suggesting that Israel had bombed that hospital. And these are the same people that cannot now identify a genocide, like an obvious genocide. And another example of this is, you know, if you kind of compare the depiction of Ukraine, the Ukrainians and what they're going through, and the Palestinians and what they're going through, you have the BBC and many of our politicians be able to identify a war crime when it's committed by Putin and Russia against Ukraine. Yet when it's our ally, Israel, committing the atrocities and the war crimes, suddenly we can't tell if it's a war crime. Suddenly we don't know anymore. Like, there's no consistency. I think the situation with Ukraine and Palestine, I think for a lot of people has been the breaking point, especially a lot of young people who are us. It's such an obvious, you know, the BBC can't lie anymore, like, and tell us that it's impartial. I think that it's just such an obvious contradiction, like the way they are telling these stories. It's obviously different depending on who the victim is. And you can't run news like that. You know, that's not news, that's not journalism. You know, we have to have a set of morals and principles, you would think, which is, you know, you can't commit war crimes. You know, war crimes are bad. If it's an enemy of our country, then the war crimes are bad. If it's an ally of our country, then I don't know if we can really call it that. And I don't know, it seems a little bit hasty, and, you know, let's blame the victim and see, you know, maybe they were deserving of the war crimes, is basically how they depict it. Anyway, and that ends up dehumanising the Palestinians even further, because, you know, in trying to defend Israel's reputation as our ally, the state is acting as, you know, the BBC is giving propaganda. It's acting as a cover for the genocide in Israel, making it easier for them to do what they're doing, because in order to protect our ally and our involvement in this situation, which they want to cover up, they then have to dehumanize Palestinians, because they have to make it seem like the war crimes, it's not that bad, like their kids are gonna grow up to be terrorists, and, you know, October the 7th was awful, and, you know, this is what happens in a war. All these mad justifications for what is horrifically evil, and would be evil no matter what people it happened to. You know, it doesn't matter, you know, where in the world we're talking, but the BBC is part of it. Because again, the Palestinian children aren't humanised. You know, they don't talk about how in Gaza you've got one of the biggest child populations. You've got one of the biggest child amputee populations, I believe. Not to mention they never held Israel to account for their openly genocidal language. Anyway, to bring this back to the situation of the monarchy, because I do believe it's connected in the sense that the BBC is one of the biggest scams, one of the biggest propaganda outlets I can think of. And also, like the monarchy, it's been very clever in that despite this, its general reputation, they put out their own PR and presented themselves as this wonderful tradition. Like, we are Britain. The royals and the BBC are Britain. We are Britain. So you know, if you have a problem with us, you're unpatriotic. Like, it's mad. It's mad brainwashing. Anyway, so I was interested in seeing how they are going to report on the Andrew situation, because the BBC are pro-royal. Many of the pro-monarchy publications and the BBC have been dealing with the Andrew situation by presenting Andrew as a lone bad apple. Again, I made a big video about this, like the two different types of people here. And I wanted to talk briefly, before we get into the Camilla Tominey stuff, I wanted to talk about like this strange situation we had on the BBC, or Eyewitness this morning, where we are clearly seeing two monarchists talking to each other. So you've got the presenter, I don't know who the presenter was, I don't know who that one was, but she was a BBC presenter trying to present the, you know, impartial BBC line. And they had on somebody called Dr. Tessa Dunlop. Now, I've looked her up, and she is a monarchist. Now, she believes in something called monarchy light, which means a more sort of modern version of the monarchy, but she still believes in the monarchy. She thinks it does public good. She thinks it's, you know, traditionalist. She wants to keep it. And she was saying on the BBC, being platformed as well, this surprised me. She basically said, we need to ask ourselves if we pushed sufficiently. So she is actually posing the question of the BBC itself. We have to examine our own complicity in this. Because people must have known about Andrew, surely. He can't have been just like a lone operator. Why weren't we asking questions? And in my last video I made about the two different sort of monarchists, you've got the earnest sort of people who are indoctrinated, which to me, I would class her as one of those. And then you've got the knowing propagandists who would panic at this kind of talk because they'd think, oh no, we have to protect the monarchy here. We don't want them asking questions. So you've got a very earnest, if exceptionally late, like at this point in time, and again, like it's fascinating that this is being said right now by a pro-monarchist, right? Somebody who isn't even going to be left-wing, because they're still supporting the right-wing idea of monarchy, just slightly more modernised. She's coming on today in 2026 to ask, genuinely, in a genuine manner it seems, you know, I feel like maybe we need to look back at you know, how we didn't ask enough questions, and maybe we should have done more. And I feel like, I felt frustrated. I also felt sympathy in a weird way. I felt like saying, it's by design, wake up. It's not a mistake. It's not a mistake. And how are you somebody who's studied this and not realised it's not a mistake? It is propaganda. But she brought up some points that, you know, we've been saying for a really long time. You know, she brought up the fact that William was hosted on the BBC just a day ago to talk about mental health. And she's basically asking, why didn't we, you know, as the BBC, why didn't we ask a question? You know, she seems to just be realising something which people on the left and elsewhere have been saying for such a long time and been called cranks and would never have gotten the BBC saying unless we were being presented as radical in some way, which is, kind of felt like the BBC are kind of helping the royals here. It kind of felt like they didn't want to ask the question. They didn't really want to offend him. And it feels like they're just waking up and realising this. And again, it's frustrating because I don't think these people are bad. I just think they're totally indoctrinated, and I don't want to be unkind because I think there is an earnestness to this. But that's not a journalist, like that's not a reporter, that's not... What have you learned from your research if you're only just now thinking, I don't know, maybe we need to ask some questions? And I understood why the presenters seemed to be like, oh no, because the presenters thinking, well, yeah, I mean, that's what we do. Shh, don't say it. Don't say the quiet part out loud. Don't bring attention to it. It really did feel like a strange situation where she had to kind of shut up Dr. Tessa Dunlop. You know, let's not go there. And again, it's like, it's years late and it's so basic. It felt like the presenter herself, it felt like the BBC as an institution was kind of taking offence, bristling at that. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean we should have asked questions? Like, they're not interested in the facts. If the facts don't fit their belief system in the BBC, they will change the facts, they will evade the facts, they will distract with something else. And again, that's something they did a lot of the time with Gaza, I found. It wasn't that they, in some cases, you know, a great atrocity would happen, and you'd turn on the BBC and it would be just something else. You know, they just weren't showing it. They weren't talking about it, which in itself is evasive and it's deliberate. So the BBC is very much, it's setting public mood, right? It claims that it's going to tell us the truth, but it doesn't. It's telling us what to think. It's creating public opinion through its position as pretending to be unbiased. You know, I feel like it should be vital in any conversation the BBC would have, if they're to be taken seriously, which they shouldn't be, about the royal family, is the fact that they have a deep connection with the royals. Like, it's like how when I make these videos, I try to make it clear that I am an anti-monarchist. You know, I'm not sitting here like, these are unbiased facts, and I'm telling you this as the, you know, I have all the knowledge and I'm completely right. I can only tell you that this is my opinion. I'm a person, this is my opinion, this feels logical to me, and by the way, these are my politics, and these are my ideas. Much more dangerous when a place like the BBC or the royal family presents themselves as these morally neutral things or good things that are British, and to question them then makes you bad. So Dr. Tessa's perspective on this seemed to be that what we need now is some transparency. And again, like, that's not what the royals and the BBC want. You know, I think, you know, her saying that, it's like, shh, we thought you were like us. We thought you were just pretending, that you actually are surprised. Don't ask the questions. She asks about the payoff. She calls it the great big payoff. She wants to know where it comes from. And she's saying, you know, I think it's time we found out where that came from. And again, it's real naivety, right? And it's the state of the media that we're in. I remember when Jeremy Corbyn, who is not a monarchist, they were constantly trying to trip him up and be like, do you believe in the royal family? And I believe his perspective was, I don't want them, but I wouldn't take them, like, it's up to the people, not me. And he was presented as like, oh, what an evil radical he was for that. When it's just the other point of view. You know, if the BBC's impartial, then why are they smearing that other point of view about the monarchy? You know, you're platforming the monarchy itself. You need to also be able to depict why people might be anti-monarchy if you are supposed to be an unbiased public broadcaster. But Dr. Tessa is asking, you know, where is the money coming from? Like, was it from the Queen? Is it from, I believe she asked if it's from, like, the Duchy of Lancaster or something, which is non-taxed money that the royals. And she's making these really good points. Even if, as I'm watching it, I'm getting that sort of feeling of frustration, which is people were saying this a really, really long time ago. And were completely smeared. You know, leftists were saying it, and you're only just realising, as if it's this new thought that's popped into your head. And again, it's all those people that have been crushed underfoot, all the people on the left who have been destroyed so that somebody who is still on the right, but a more moderate person, can say something and be like, oh, but maybe we should take a look at what's going on here. Maybe we shouldn't just believe what they're telling us. Like, it's bizarre. It's a bizarre experience. It's to watch. You know, it is. But it's a very common experience if you're politically on the left, I feel. Because you're often like, it's like with gay marriage. I remember when gay marriage was, I would have conversations with people who are good people, have gay friends, people around me, people who love me. I'm gay, I'm a lesbian, and they're very loving towards me, you know, and they're fine with it now. But back then, I remember all sorts of arguments like, oh, well, you know, if they get married, then what's to stop them from marrying little kids? And what's to stop people from marrying their dogs? And it's our word. And why should they get married? And it's not right. And it's not biblical. And these were people who weren't Christians anyway. And weren't even following Christianity. When it came to this group, they wanted them to be punished and they shouldn't have it. But they also didn't want to follow the rules themselves. And that was commonplace. And being someone who was pro-gay marriage at that point, people would say horrible things. You know, people acted like it was really extreme and dangerous and it was going to destabilize society. Obviously now, it's commonplace. It's quite normal. It's not frightening. And people act like, of course, we're so proud of how tolerant we are. And it's like, the people, especially the gay people, the LGBT people at the time, and their allies, were treated terribly to get there. Just so everyone can act like it was always the way. You know, it's like apartheid, it's like slavery. People pretend that we move forward naturally. You know, like when it comes to slavery, for example, people act like, you know, oh, you know, we got rid of slavery and, you know, it was the right thing to do and it was always going to go there. Well, no, it was because of activists, right? It was because of actual slaves and black people and their allies. People who at the time were saying things that were seen as terrifying, right? They were putting themselves at risk for very basic things, which is a human being should not own another human being. And their lives were destroyed, and their lives were sometimes taken, and their families' lives were destroyed. Only for years later, people to then act like it was always going to go there. And in fact, people probably shouldn't talk about racism anymore because we've solved it. You didn't solve it. The activists, the people who actually were enslaved, they solved it, and they suffered and they died for it. For something that we now take for granted. We love to rewrite history in that way. Often if you're somebody who's kind of thinking like ahead of your time, or just in terms of equality or outside of the box, at the time you're saying it, it's going to be quite miserable. But I do believe, you know, that every time, if we believe in something and we push forward, every voice is important and it's frustrating, but it's also still pushing things ever so slightly, right? It's normalizing, it's talking to the people around you, it's gradually making these changes, but it is frustrating to see it then often used against new groups that want their rights. For example, the trans community. I do believe in the future we're going to look back at the transphobia and we're going to see it like homophobia, and we're going to be like, that was awful. It's the same pattern, and the people who have been very, very against trans people now are going to act like they were always pro-trans in the future, when their grandchildren and great-grandchildren ask what on earth was going on at that time period, why we couldn't let people just be themselves. So Dr. Tessa Dunlop does her bit, and then they have somebody else on. And this is, who is it? I think it's Daniel Sanford, who is a royal correspondent. The royal family have said they will cooperate, which is very important to say before today's development. Like, before they get into anything, it's like, let me just reassure everyone. The royal family have said they'll cooperate, okay, let's cover our bases now. He also mentions it's important to note that the Queen and Tony Blair wanted Andrew as trade envoy, but Charles didn't. You know, as if that makes a difference whatsoever. But it's very much like, quick, let's protect the king. Let's protect the monarchy. And again, I feel like they're talking to him like he is like this reason, like they're talking to him like he's kind of unbiased because he's like a royal correspondent because he studies it. Well, he's still prefaced anything that's gone on by immediately being like, but don't be mean to the king. That's not what he's there for. That's not his job. And I think they were probably really thrown by what Tessa was saying specifically about the William interview. I'm gonna make a video specifically about the William mental health interview and the depiction of that, because that's another one of those crazy making situations where when Harry was talking about mental health and he was talking about, Meghan was talking about mental health, you know, she was talking about how she was in such a dark place, you know, that she almost harmed herself. They were presented as these kind of like whiners, and they were accused of using psychobabble and being brainwashed by therapists, etc. And it's interesting that now it's like, oh, William's, you know, so modern and wise for going to talking about male mental health. It's kind of like, it's another situation where it's like, you and your organisation and other like news forces and William himself in this case also contributed to somebody who tried to say that earlier getting totally obliterated and smeared. And now it's like, William's so brave for talking about mental health. And again, I think it's a cynical move, the timing of it. I think it's to create sympathy. I think it's like, oh, but please think of our mental health. And I'm not saying their mental health is unimportant, but when you had a royal in the family who was pro-royal but cared about those things, he was destroyed. And now this has come up. It's like it's being used as a sort of, you know, oh, but feel sorry for us, the family, in all this. And again, it's that weird, there's too much humanising of the royals from the BBC at this point in time as a deflection as to what's going on. There's a lot of conversation about, oh, the poor family, you know, what must they be going through? I'm not saying it's not going to be a horrible situation for them, but they are not the victims here. Like, they are not the main victims here. And it is very, very suspect and dodgy that they are suddenly pushing all this, like, oh, William's mental health and he's been through so much. You know, the poor family, poor Charles. Suddenly it's like, leave them alone, they're people. And then if you suggest as an anti-monarchist, well, if they're just people, then maybe that, you know, they shouldn't be in this position and they should be able to just live normal lives, like happy lives where they're not better than anyone else, they're not worse than anyone else, they're not provided for by the taxpayer, you know, they're safe and they can just live normally, we can all be equal. They don't want that kind of care. They don't want us thinking about feeling sorry for the royals in that regard. You know, again, when Harry was talking about that, as a monarchist, they didn't want to know. They didn't care. So I noticed that the Telegraph with Camilla Tominey had put out their daily tea, whatever it is they do, their perspective on this situation. Now, Camilla Tominey, you will know of if you watch this channel or if you follow royal reporting. She has written some particularly vile and malicious articles about Harry and Meghan, to the extent that even Harry and Meghan themselves have kind of particularly noticed her as a particularly odious person, and them saying that kind of made her feel like, you know, oh, I'm in a great war with them. It's like, I don't know, it's very bizarre. I feel like with her, the psychology of it is she feels power through proximity to power, and she thought she was closer in with them than she was, and now she's very angry and resentful about the fact that Harry's like left and puts down some boundaries. Basically, the harassment that masquerades as reporting that she and others publish is being called out by Harry, and of course they can't stand that. They cannot stand it. It makes them furiously angry, because then people will realise the Emperor is wearing no clothes. People will start to look at it and think, actually, yeah, like it's ridiculous. You are working arm in glove with the royals themselves. You are not a reporter, you're a propagandist. Not only that, you are inciting hatred for like no reason other than like bitterness and the fact that it's your paycheck on the line. Like, it makes you money. It's awful. Right. But she was on with the Telegraph's royal editor, Hannah Furness, and a man called Tim Stanley. And the description says they're going to explain what on earth, where the royals go from here. And also just recently they had Rhys Mogg on, which was fascinating. I watched a bit of that, and he argued bizarrely, again, because they're very pro-monarchy, they believe that Andrew is this like rotten apple. He's the bad one, jettison him, everything will be fine. But he said, Jonathan Rhys Mogg, he said something interesting. He said something about how being royal means that you're not entitled to any privacy. Like, you're born and you don't get privacy, and that's just how it is. You know, you unfortunately you don't have a private life. You're not entitled to anything private, and that's part of it, part of being born into it. And he was saying this as someone who supports the monarchy. I don't understand how you can sit there and be like, yeah, you get no choice, it's miserable, you have no privacy, you don't belong to yourself at all, but I love the royals and I support the royals. Like, what are you talking about? It's weird. Right. And I feel like Camilla Tominey covers her bases here as well, because she says that, you know, of course, we all heard things, but you know, you can't be writing about it unless you have actual evidence. This is what she says in this Telegraph thing from today. And so she's covering her bases because it sounds like she's had suspicions or known about the Andrew thing for a while, but, you know, unless you have sources, you can't write about it, which I can kind of understand if it weren't for the fact that you were still publishing absolute lies about Meghan and Harry constantly, and it didn't seem to bother you then. Do you know what I mean? Like, that in that situation, it wasn't important to gather your sources and get the facts straight. But in this situation, suddenly it's, oh, you know, I had to be very careful because, you know, I don't want to be writing anything untrue. You know, it feels very willful, doesn't it? You see, like, the fictitious drivel that woman has written, and then she sits here and goes, oh, but, you know, just in case, you know, we did kind of all know about the Andrew thing, but we decided not to pursue it, but, you know, we didn't know the facts. I mean, like, it's ridiculous. It's like, if it doesn't suit your narrative, it's like you don't want to know the facts, because you're a propagandist, right? You're not a journalist. And it's interesting, so they talk about the Queen, and again, the reason I wanted to focus on this Telegraph stuff is that they are pro-monarchy. They're a huge part of this. They talk about the Queen, and Camilla Tominey sounds horrified, and, you know, she kind of says, you know, surely now people won't be examining her legacy of her late majesty. You know, it's awful and it's posthumous. You know, she's died. Can't, you know, it's that attitude of surely people won't besmirch her name now. You know, how cruel. And this is the thing that annoys me as well, is that it's not consistent at all. Because when Elizabeth was alive, like in my lifetime, if you had a criticism, you were told that it's not fair because she's an older woman, right? It's cruel. It's nasty. Okay, so that was emotional manipulation. You can't criticise the institution that she's being used as a sort of puppet of, a mascot of, because it was unfair to her. And now she's gone, so it won't hurt her anyway. Now it's, you can't then criticise her decisions, her team, the firm, because that's cruel and unkind. It's interesting, isn't it? It's always cruel and unkind. But of course it's not cruel and unkind when you harass Meghan Markle to the point of, like, she wants to take her own life. That's not unkind. Suddenly, like, we don't need our empathy there, but we need more empathy for a dead woman's legacy as part of her brand. Like, it's ridiculous. But then they also make the argument, they say that because she was older, she can't be held accountable for it because she was old. And then they say, you know, what would she have made of this? The poor woman, you know. They really do say, I think not in this exact words, but their kind of takeaway is, you know, the only good thing here, thank goodness the Queen isn't around to hear this. And it's like, oh, this awful slander, and oh, you know, the poor Queen, how would she have dealt with this? And again, it's like, the Queen gave money for that settlement. And sure, like, it could be for sure that, you know, she didn't know, or that, you know, she believed her son. That could be true. But she can't simultaneously be used as somebody who doesn't know what's going on and is flawed just like everyone else and is actually very sheltered and doesn't really know what's happening and can be manipulated. She can't be that for sympathy and then also be a necessary head of state that we need because she keeps everyone in check and she makes sure everything's just and we need her for her strength. She can't be both of those things. And bear in mind, you know, they talk about this money situation. You know, oh, the poor Queen getting involved in this. The Telegraph itself, I believe, was the one that confirmed she'd paid money to silence a victim of trafficking. I think that was about 3 years ago. Surely that was massive. Surely that was huge and needed to be investigated. They also say this as well. This is interesting. They're kind of throwing Charles under the bus here. They say, look, it lets Charles off the hook a bit to blame it all on Her Majesty, her late Majesty, because his team would have been part of it towards the end. And logically, yes, okay, that makes logical sense. But then they say, you know, but nobody could have known anyway. Nobody knew. So, you know, they're kind of, I do believe that the monarchy is as a system, is so cruel to the people within it as well, even the people that serve it and were born in, I think they're getting ready to jettison Charles. I'm making a video about this, but I think they're skipping over him to William. Honestly, I think they're cutting their losses right now. I think they've realised we cannot save this now. We can't do it. We got to get rid of Charles. I know we pretended like, you know, we were all pro-Charles, but he's got to go now because the system is falling apart. So goodbye. Goodbye, Your Majesty. And yeah, we're bringing in William. Then they move to William, and it's this description of William that I wanted to talk about. He is the only pivot that they now have left, right? So it all kind of hinges on him. It's their Hail Mary. And in a dark way, it's kind of delicious. And I say that, and it's on a personal level, I do feel very sorry for William in his situation. I think the trauma he's gone through, the weird life experiences, I think it's a very complex picture. I do have empathy for him in that regard. But when you think about the fact that now all they have left, the monarchists, is the young, right? I believe they even say that different royals are thin on the ground now. All they've got is William. And they haven't been building William up either. They haven't. So the PR is up. In Spare, Harry talks about how even Charles and Camilla's team is basically putting out nasty things about Kate and William out of a sense of spite, you know, and jealousy and, you know, hierarchy. So they haven't been building William up because I think that would have made things, there would have been jealousies involved, right? Because the king, you know, in a hereditary monarchy, the king's got to be the main one. Can't have anyone overshadow the king. But in doing that, they kind of haven't been building William up at all. When you think about the fact that these people, like at the Telegraph, these nasty people, the monarchists who turned on a boy that was born in Harry, who was a monarchist, okay, he was a monarchist. I don't like the fact he was a monarchist, but he was, and he probably still is. He just wanted to make some changes. And he dared to speak out about his mistreatment and take on the tabloids, and they tried to destroy him for it. Now, they are desperate. And they are thinking, oh gosh, we need to appeal to the young. There's very few royals here now. We need to connect to the young, and we need to suddenly make William seem like a man of the people that young people are going to enjoy. Now, do you know who was going to be in that role? Now, and I say this as somebody, I am so glad that Harry went and Meghan went, because as someone who is anti-monarchist, I could see the huge PR and the optics, even if it was just optics, of them being in the royal family, what that would do for the royals. I could see that. It was obvious. It was young people, it's young people that are against the monarchy now, right? Young people are not buying into it. So at one point they had like a kind of quartet, didn't they? And it kind of, as a PR move, you could have William and Kate, who are given the more traditional conservative stuff. You got Harry and Meghan, who probably would appeal more to liberals. I say liberals and not leftists because, you know, the monarchy is undemocratic. But those people in the middle, right, those kind of liberal people, they hounded out the two people, Harry and Meghan, and the kids, right? And I'm glad the kids are out because they're not being made to perform like poor George, Charlotte and Louis are. They hounded out the very people who might have helped them to survive this. I've said this for a long time. They destroyed their own chances of survival as a brand because they couldn't get past their racism, the pettiness, the vindictiveness, the heir and the spare dynamic. Like, to its own detriment, I do believe the crown has destroyed itself. The very system, right there, you had Diana's boys. Just in terms of PR, that could have, I believe, won the monarchy another 20 years or so. Genuinely, I do. And again, it's not a lesson that they learned either, because the monarchy doesn't learn. And this is a part of the reason why Harry was hounded out. Because he was an anti-monarchist, he was just saying, look, we need to kind of learn and revamp some things here. And they were like, oh, you're a charlatan, like, how dare you, you're brainwashed by Meghan. How dare you go against this, we all hate you now, goodbye. We're not going to protect you, you've betrayed us all, goodbye. Unpatriotic, evil. But they didn't learn from Diana. Again, Diana was a monarchist, okay, but she wanted to kind of modernise the monarchy to some level. They almost went before because of what happened to Diana and the way that people could see the treatment of Diana and the mistreatment of Diana. And they've done it again. And they've done it in a spectacularly stupid way, because this is an institution, again, colonialist. It is imperialist. And then you have a woman of colour marry into your family. And Meghan was always too good. Always too good for that brand. She really was. And yet she falls in love with Harry and she goes along with it. Okay, so she's like, okay, I'll go for it. What on earth were they thinking at this time, right, when people are looking at the colonial history, when the monarchy and institutions like it are hanging in the balance? even just optics, right? The pure naked greed of it, you know, thinking about the brand. Why did they think that hounding out the first person of colour to marry into that family was going to work for them? Like, what was going through their brains at that point? So they start talking about William. I'm going to quote this directly because this is just fascinating to me. So Camilla Tominey's are asking Hannah, Hannah, can we just take ourselves into the mind of Prince William right now? And I ask you that because he's been quite busy this week talking about mental health. I mean, one wonders what is going through his mind right now. What an ordeal this bloke has been put through over the course of the last 5 years. And the guy on the panel says, I suspect he was spotted in a phone box putting in a complaint about Andrew. And they all laugh, right? So the implication being that, you know, from the inside, William always knew that Andrew was a wrong one, and he's probably personally like called the police about it, and they think that's a good thing, right? They're presenting that as a good thing. So suddenly, like, you know, to call out the institution when there's corruption there, that's heroic now. And that's what they apparently want in an heir, when that was what they destroyed Harry for. Anyway, so they all laugh, and Camilla Tominey says, I agree, but we've had Megxit, right? He's been sold down the river by his own brother, to whom he was once incredibly close. The man then rolls his eyes for some reason, I don't know what that means. He's had to deal with cancer diagnosis of his wife and his father. He has got the absolute weight and burden of being the next monarch on his shoulders, because now there are too few royals to go around. He's been instrumental in trying to exile his errant uncle out of the scene to preserve his own future. And no wonder he's going in. Who was he speaking to? BBC Radio 1 about men's mental health. Now, I feel like we have to get into this. So I could tell, and I feel like I didn't mention this at the start, so I might put this just briefly at the very start of the video. But yesterday when I was looking, I keep updated on the way they are talking about Meghan in the press, you know, how they continue to do so. And with this Andrew scandal, I noticed that there were so many new articles about Meghan. So many negative articles about Meghan and Harry popping up, including by The Telegraph. And it felt like it was like a barrage of these things because it's a distraction technique. So I should have realised at that point, okay, so it's going to get way worse for Andrew because they are suddenly flooding us with these ridiculous articles about Meghan and Harry. But, you know, they are still using Meghan now. Because, and that's, they have been this whole time. They've still been using Meghan and Harry because they have to present the royals that are left as besieged because it creates sympathy. So Megxit, they describe it as, and the way they kind of scoff when they use that term, like it's bullying, it's harassment, like Megxit, as if she's this great disaster to befall the family. But it's brought up here in the sense of a reason why William might have poor mental health, and poor William, you know, this poor bloke, he's been through so much after what Meghan did to him. Like, we haven't heard that Meghan's done anything to that man. As much as we know, the worst thing she did was say, please can you get your finger out of my face, when he was like pointing at her rudely in her face. But, you know, they're using it as poor William to go through Meghan. Like, how is he the victim of that? They are making him Meghan's victim, right? Poor William. And it serves the monarchy again, because it's like the poor monarchy having to deal with Meghan. You know, they say he's been sold down the river by his own brother, to whom he was once incredibly close. And just moments ago, they were laughing about the fact that, you know, secretly he's been inside the family informing on Andrew, which I agree is the right thing to do. I don't think he's done it, but, you know, that in that depiction of what was going on, in that case, it's heroic. You know, they're like, oh, all along he was working against, he's been instrumental in trying to get rid of this corruption. But when Harry tries to do it, it's described as him selling his brother down the river, as if he's disloyal. You know, then they talk about the cancer diagnosis of his wife and his father. And again, that is not relevant here in terms of having a monarchy. And the corruption that's gone on, and what the royal family did, and, you know, if they paid off a victim, right, all that stuff. That is not now relevant. Again, when they'll weaponize empathy. So the Telegraph will be ruthless. And, you know, the press have been evil to William too, not in the same racist manner, and I think it really went into overdrive with Meghan and Harry. But they have had a history of being quite horrible to Kate and William. Different level, but still nasty. There's no empathy for them then, because again, they're just, as you know, as Rees-Mogg says, they don't have privacy, they don't have a right to privacy, they're just kind of props, right? We use them to sell stuff. That's what we do, and to maintain conservative ideas. In that instance, they don't care about him as a person and his mental health, but now the monarchy's under threat, suddenly it's like, oh, poor William. Suddenly he's a person and we feel sorry for him. You know, why are you bringing up the cancer diagnosis of his wife and father when you're referring to the royal family in the Andrew situation? Like, it's so manipulative. They say he's got the absolute weight and burden of being the next monarch on his shoulders because now there are too few royals to go around. Oh, I wonder why there are too few royals to go around. I wonder what happened to the spare. I wonder where the spare and his wife are. I wonder where the other people who might have helped, who wanted to modernise, who wanted to work within the family, for the family. I wonder where they might be. People that young people seem to like. I wonder, why are they not here? Poor William, there's no one left. So frustrating. Like, Harry even says in his book, right, he talks about how he believes that what he's doing is actually going to help the family. They need to learn to respond differently to a crisis, right? If there is something that's wrong, they need to address it. They need to do the right thing. They need to make these moves towards modernising. What Harry is describing in Spare, and that they hated him for and they got rid of him for, is now exactly what they're saying would now save the monarchy. And it's like, yeah, we were saying this even on the left, right? This is partly why we're so glad that, you know, they went, that Harry and Meghan did go, because they would have been wonderful PR for the royals. What a great sell. What wonderful optics you've got there. And the royals ruined it for themselves. Like, the family and the firm ruined it for themselves because they couldn't get over their petty spite. They couldn't stand up against racists, right? They couldn't do it. Like, whose fault is it that there are now too few royals to go around? And they say, you know, he's been instrumental in trying to exile his errant uncle. You know, and I'm not saying, we don't know how on the inside of that, you know, William might feel, but he's not said anything. It's not like he's done a brave thing and been like, right, I know this is going on and I'm going to make a public statement. It's only now that suddenly he's expressing concern. And again, you know, that is probably his own people, his own advisors telling him how to behave, you know. I think very much a lot of the original William, or the, you know, the person he could have been, is possibly gone or hidden for protection in many ways. But the fact they're trying to now reframe him as this courageous person who's led this charge, that was Harry. That was Harry. And he was destroyed. Or they tried to destroy him. They couldn't quite do it. And then they say, I forget if this is the man or if it's Rachel, everyone's mental health is important, including those who are accused of things. And I think we should bear in mind that Andrew has a much diminished retinue now. He's clearly been sidelined. He's been arrested and taken in by the police. Where's his head right now? I do sincerely hope that someone is looking after him, because everyone in that situation deserves to have someone. And it's just such a manipulative tactic here. Because these are the people who have absolutely destroyed Meghan and Harry. Like, they didn't care about Meghan being near to... Right? And she was pregnant and she was being harassed. And she didn't want to live anymore and she didn't know what to do and there was no help. Harry being petrified he was going to lose another woman in his life. Not being able to protect her. Like, she was in that situation herself. But they're more concerned about somebody who... someone's mental health based on being held to account for something that they've done in their 50s, right? We're not talking about, again, like they often talk about Andrew like he's a young prince. And again, there is a lot of emotional immaturity in the way that they grow them up in that family. I grant them that. You know, there's delayed maturity. But this man, that doesn't work when you're in your 40s. When you're in your 40s, you're in your 50s. Like, it just doesn't work as a narrative. Think about the empathy they're asking us to feel now for Andrew versus the bile and the hatred. It's like they wanted Meghan to kill herself. They wanted her gone and dead. It's just sick anyway. And then Rachel says, it's hard because the royals are trying to go about their business doing good works and it's been overshadowed by the Andrew affair. And again, that's a distancing technique. It's like the royals are good inherently and they're trying to do good works. And, you know, it's overshadowed by Andrew. No, they're part of it. The firm is part of it. You're going to see this distancing move to act like the royal family has nothing to do with it. They chipped in to pay off the victim. I believe Tessa Dunlop earlier, I don't know if I said this or not because I kind of veered off script. She said that she believed, based on her own experiences, that from a period between, let me find this. Oh yeah, okay, so a period between 2011 and 2019, she can attest to the fact that the BBC pushed away press inquiries regarding to the late Virginia Giuffre, who again at that point was alive and it would have helped her and other victims, right? And the BBC weren't doing that for no reason. It's because of the contract. So it's because of the royals, it's to help the royals out. You know, this is not just a weird guy in their family, it's the system is complicit. Now, Camilla Tominey then asks, she asks Rachel if William has been heckled or if it's just the king. And Rachel says, only a quiet question for William when he was leaving Saudi Arabia, but she doesn't think he heard. He hasn't been heckled in public, but then he's been indoors. But if they go on walkabout, it will be on their minds. And the guy on the panel says, but you can't judge public opinion on the royal family based on heckles. There's always some Republicans who turn up and heckle. And they agree, as if, oh, those terrible Republicans. You know, they're always going to come and spoil the fun, of course. Now, this bit was awful. Like, this bit just drove me insane. Rachel then commends the bravery of the king for still doing walkabouts, right? And she says, because he could scrap this at any point, because we know what's going to happen. Some lone person will heckle, everyone in the crowd will then boo that person and then start cheering for Charles and Camilla or whoever else is there, but then the headlines will say that they've been heckled. And then she says, so fair play to him for carrying on meeting people, but it must be difficult for them. But she's just described that it's usually like it's a lone heckler who then gets booed by people. And yes, you know, there is such a peasant mentality, such a serf mentality here, the subservience, that someone will want accountability from the royal family, and the people in the crowd will be like, boo, can't you see that we're lesser than them? We're scum and we're nothing. We're like ants under their feet. How dare you question the king? We've been waiting for hours to watch him pass us by. It's the highlight of my life. Like, she literally acknowledges that the whole crowd support the king because they're royalists, they're monarchists. That person will often get horribly, like, taken away or something. But, you know, it's so brave because then people will report that they've been heckled. She acts like that's misinterpreted. Like, you know, oh, and then they lie and say they've been heckled. Well, if someone heckles you, you have been heckled. And then she brings up that the royals, you know, what they really care about is their charities having to face this, you know, people shouting about whatever they want to shout about. Think about that wording, shouting about whatever they want to shout about. It minimises. What do you mean shouting about whatever they want to shout about? What have we just discovered? What are people worried about here? Like, it's not a small thing. And she says it's uncomfortable and it's very difficult for them, the royals. Okay, so then Camilla Tominey says this, and this is a quote, a direct quote. The other thing, Hannah, this whole mantra that has served the monarchy very well, never complain, never explain, appears to need modernising. And isn't William more of the mindset that we need to leave less unsaid? I do think it was interesting that the Prince and Princess of Wales, as you say, when he embarked on that trip to Saudi Arabia, released that statement expressing their deep concern about Epstein. He is going to, because sometimes I think they've almost been damned. I mean, you could say in Andrew's case, he wasn't damned by his silence, he was damned by, I don't sweat, and I was at Pizza Express in Woking. But at the same time, this kind of, like, no one's going to say anything, seems to have acted against them overall now, in the macro sense, and perhaps William needs to bring the entire institution up to date. Who is saying this? Who is saying this? I feel like I want to say to Camilla Tominey directly, who was that? Who was offering that? Who was offering monarchy but modernised? Who was that? It was the man that you helped hound out of the system and almost drive his wife to. They're now trying to present William as that figure. They're saying, you know, we need someone to bring the institution up to date. You know, we need someone who's going to speak up and change things. That was Harry. He was right there. He was willing. This man was a monarchist, right? Against all, to me, as reason and good sense and his own well-being, he was a monarchist. He was right there. But he married Meghan, right? And he questioned the system. And how dare he do that? So they destroyed him. And now apparently that's what they need. That's what they need, and that's what they need William to be. But that's not William. Okay, so Camilla then says, they say William wants to get rid of the never complain, never explain. And at this point, Camilla has the absolute gall to then laugh and says something about, but they always complain anyway, they never stop complaining. What are you talking about? You're harassing them. You know, it does make you realise that the people who are very, very pro-monarchy really hate the people in the monarchy anyway. Like, they are just nothing to them. They are completely dehumanised. Like, they're not people to these journalists. They're just money-making machines. And the way they can continue conservative ideas in this country. But Camilla says that, you know, apparently William wishes to make statements when it's necessary, and that he's been pushing behind the scenes to distance them from his uncle. Other members of the family thought people might see Andrew's side. William thought it was never going to go away and was quite firm in this. They then mentioned that William is on half-term with his children right now. So again, it's that humanising dad with the kids vibe. What an absolute mess. What an absolute own goal that we could all see from a mile off as anti-monarchists. Why, like, it was nasty, but it wasn't even smart in terms of optics to get rid of Harry. Because if you still had Harry and Meghan there right now, it's going to be more, first of all, you're going to have more royals. Okay, you've got the Diana connection. You can then distance from Charles and that lot, and you can say, right, but these are Diana's boys and their wife. You've got Kate, who's doing the very traditional gender roles and the English Rose vibe that she's putting out, and, you know, I don't really say very much, and I care about children, and, you know, that vibe that they're putting out for her, the kind of Earth Mother. And you've got William, who is, you know, they're more conservative, those two. And then, like I said, you've got Harry and Meghan. It's in a world where we are now questioning systems, which Harry and Meghan could see coming, there would still be a way through this if, as an institution, you hadn't hounded those people out. If, for example, they had supported Harry in protecting his family, if they had helped to protect his family, they could try and present their version of a modern monarchy, which, again, I don't think the monarchy can ever be like a democratic good thing, but for monarchists, that's exactly what you need right now. Because Meghan's a fantastic speaker. Harry is a truth teller, right? Harry will stand up to systems. Right now, they would be absolute rocket fuel, right? Imagine those four in this situation now with all their kids. And again, I'm glad the kids, Archie and Lily, are away from this, because, you know, they're more protected than George, Charlotte and Louis, who are getting pressured into this horrible system. But now it is just William and Kate. That's all there is left. And I believe this is going to be the end of the monarchy now. And I'm glad about it. But for monarchists, I can't quite believe that they were that racist and cruel that they've killed their own system. They've actually gone against what was in their own interests to protect the system that they care about, because they couldn't stop being racist, right? Or petty and spiteful and jealous. Anyway, thank you for watching this very, very long video. I'm gonna go now. Hope you enjoyed it. Very long, but I think it's important to document this stuff. And yeah, let me know what you think. I love you, and I will see you really soon. Okay, bye.